Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well, having a good Thursday. Of course, it's the day after AEW Dynamite and WWE NXT. The Wednesday Night Wars continue. So, as always, we have a ton of news stories to get into. So let's get straight into the news and let's kick off with the announcement from Cody and Brandi Rhodes. Yes, last night on AEW Dynamite, Cody and Brandi Rhodes announced their pregnancy. Yes, on last night's episode of Dynamite, Cody and Brandi Rhodes revealed that they will be having their first child next year. The two were involved in a quick segment at home where they received an item at the door. Cody went to the door, brought the gift back inside and opened it, revealing the pregnancy. Now, this is obviously, first of all, before we get into anything that I say there, congratulations to Cody and Brandi Rhodes on the announcement that they are pregnant, specifically Brandi Rhodes, of course, and they're expecting their first child together. So huge congratulations to them. Of course, what a year. What a year for pregnancies of pro wrestling couples, right? You've got Cody and Brandi Rhodes, you had Jon Moxley and Renee Paquette. You also had, of course, Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch. You had the BALOR twins, both give birth this year as well. So what a year. What a year for pregnancy announcements and births in the pro wrestling universe. So huge congratulations to Cody and Brandi Rhodes. I suppose what's interesting now about this announcement is where does it leave the whole Cody Rhodes and Shaq situation when it comes to AEW Dynamite, because it's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious what they were gearing towards. They were gearing towards Cody and Brandi Rhodes versus Shaq and Jade Cargill on Dynamite, or at least on an AEW event or pay-per-view or something like that in the future. Of course, now that it's been revealed that Brandi Rhodes is pregnant, that's not going to happen. That isn't going to happen because Brandi Rhodes isn't going to wrestle when she's got a baby inside of her, so that's not going to happen. So it's going to be interesting to see how they pivot, because I don't think just because Brandi Rhodes is pregnant, they're not going to follow through with this Shaq match or appearance on Dynamite. They even did the angle, what was it, last week when they did the water in the face of Shaq, and that was with Brandi Rhodes and Shaq then. So I would suspect that they're somehow going to have to pivot. Cody, I would assume, is going to get another partner, or Jade Cargill will just be a manager for Shaq when they have that eventual match involving Shaq. I really don't know if they would do a Cody Rhodes versus Shaq singles match. The idea of the mixed tag was, in my opinion, to take the burden off of Shaquille O'Neal and make sure that there wasn't too much expected of him. Of course, he's not a pro wrestler and he is older, so I think that was the idea there. Nevertheless, that isn't going to happen now, so that is something to consider going forward, but we can talk about that at a later date. They can figure that out at a later date. It's all about celebrating the happy news when it comes to Cody and Brandi Rhodes. So as I mentioned, huge congratulations to Cody and Brandi Rhodes, who are expecting their first child in 2021. Let's pivot to NXT, though, because we've got some information about NXT Superstar Cameron Grimes, because it's been revealed that Cameron Grimes will be out of action until early 2021. Now, NXT Superstar Cameron Grimes is out of action for the rest of 2020. It was noted during this week's episode of NXT on the USA Network that Cameron Grimes will be out of action for 4 to 6 weeks. Now, the storyline reason given for Grimes' injury was that Timothy Thatcher twisted his leg on last week's edition of NXT. Last Wednesday's show saw Tommaso Ciampa defeat Cameron Grimes in singles action, but after the match, Grimes confronted Thatcher over his interference, but Thatcher grabbed him by the leg and twisted it, sending him to the ground. WWE announced the NXT injury report the next day that Grimes suffered some sort of leg injury at the hands of Thatcher and that he was out of action, but at the time there was no timetable for his return. Now we know that it's 4 to 6 weeks. Now, it must be said also, there is no word yet if this is just a storyline or if this is some form of a legitimate injury. I don't know. 4 to 6 weeks. The thing is, when you get an injury at this time of the year, it's kind of convenient, I suppose, because if you say, oh, they're out for the rest of the year, they can come back on the first or second episode of NXT. Of course, they've got a huge New Year's Evil episode of NXT, so Cameron Grimes could come back then as well. So we don't know how legitimate the injury is. It could just be it's actually just a slight knock he's been dealing with for ages, and that now is the perfect time for him to take a couple of weeks off and then return in 2021. So we just don't know. When it comes to Cameron Grimes, though, I mean, he was a slow burn for me. I really liked his work in Impact Wrestling as Trevor Lee. I thought he did a good job of that kind of appearances. The whole Cameron Grimes character, I was worried about how that was going to work in NXT, and I was worried about was he really at the level of a WWE? And I think he absolutely has proved it. I think he's been one of the most compelling characters in NXT. He's not for everyone. The gimmick is slightly over the top, and some people don't like that kind of stuff, and that's fair enough. I mean, it's when pro wrestling comes to taste, good taste, bad taste, and all opinions like they are on this channel are welcome for me when it comes to pro wrestling. I'm a fan of Cameron Grimes. I don't know how he would work on the main roster, because I think Vince McMahon would take one look at him and go, don't know if he has the look, don't know if he has the size, and his gimmick is a comedy gimmick. That would be the concern for me there, is considering he's got a comedy gimmick. Vince McMahon, it's the same what I said with Riddle. Once you have a comedy gimmick in the mind of Vince McMahon, that's it, you're typecast. Look at Drew Gulak. Earlier this year, he was having a show-stealer match with Daniel Bryan at Elimination Chamber. Now he's chasing the 24/7 championship. And Vince McMahon likes Drew Gulak. But in his mind, he's just gone, comedy guy. So that would be my concern for Cameron Grimes if and when he goes up to the main roster. Now let's talk about AEW, because it was announced last night that Kenny Omega, the AEW World Champion, will be defending his AEW World Championship against Rey Fenix. Now, after defeating Joey Janela in the main event of last night's AEW Dynamite on TNT, AEW World Champion Kenny Omega was notified of his next championship defense, with Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Don Callis gloating about Omega after his victory. Pac, Rey Fenix, and Penta El Zero Miedo, always easy for me to say, also known as Death Triangle, showed up on the stage. Pac let Omega know that the two of them had some unfinished business. Of course, Pac and Kenny Omega did feud in the early days of AEW last year. Of course, they had the match at All Out, which Pac won, remember, convincingly, which surprised a lot of people at the time. So yes, I think Omega got his victory back at one point, but there is history there. So I would love to see a Pac versus Kenny Omega match in the future. But he was there for other reasons, Pac said last night. Of course, back in October, Rey Fenix defeated his brother Penta in the first round of the title eliminator tournament, but a neck injury forced him out of the tournament and Penta went to the next round. Fenix was replaced, as I mentioned, by his brother to face Omega in the second round. Pac told Omega last night that he can't call himself the rightful champion until Rey Fenix gets his opportunity. Don Callis tried to tell Pac that he wasn't in the position to make matches like that, but Pac said he'd already spoken to AEW President Tony Khan, and the match was made official for the December 30 Dynamite New Year's Smash Night 1. Of course, Chris Jericho will also be on commentary for that night. Now, what's interesting about that is, of course, Don Callis saying you can't make those matches, and Pac saying, well, Tony Khan's already sanctioned the match. That goes back to a video I spoke about yesterday. Be sure to check it out on the channel when I talked about this potential Tony Khan and Don Callis feud that's going to be continuing on Impact and on AEW TV, trying to one-up each other. Of course, Tony Khan, he appeared on Impact on Tuesday and said he was going to teach Don Callis some lessons about the wrestling business, and maybe he did that last night by blindsiding Callis and Omega with that Rey Fenix match for a future episode of Dynamite. Furthermore, I mean, Kenny Omega versus Rey Fenix, wow, what a match that's going to be. I mean, that is going to be fantastic. And I know people might say, wow, you know, flips, dives, and all that kind of stuff. Jim Ross, AEW commentator, has been talking about it. I've spoken about it. I spoke about it yesterday. Spoke about the criticisms and how Jim Ross was right, and how people like Brandon Cutler mocking JR is just completely out of line, because I think those criticisms are absolutely valid. Nevertheless, it doesn't make me any less hyped for the Rey Fenix versus Kenny Omega match, because Kenny Omega, man oh man, is he on a roll at the moment. Whether it's with AEW, whether it's with AAA, whether it's with Impact Wrestling, the guy is just firing on all cylinders, and I have no doubt in my mind the match between Kenny Omega and Rey Fenix, it's not even going to be a show stealer. It really could be a match of the year right at the end of the year. So who knows? They might do something really, really special. When it comes to Rey Fenix as well, I've said this for a while. Rey Fenix to me is a future AEW World Champion. I've said it over and over and over again, and it's absolutely true. He really is. Both Pentagon and Rey Fenix could absolutely, I mean, they previously were single stars, and they've kind of been teaming more recently in the last few years, but they could easily just branch off and be single stars and singles champions. People forget how young Rey Fenix is as well. His career is only just starting, it really is, and the potential for him is just unlimited. We've spoken about before when it comes to Rey Mysterio, his importance to WWE, especially in the mid-2000s, but it's still the same now, of getting that Hispanic Latino audience. He was huge for that. That's why he stayed on SmackDown for all those years in the mid-2000s, because nobody could get that audience like Rey Mysterio. Now, I don't mean to just compare one person in a mask to another and say he's going to be the next Rey Mysterio, but Mysterio is kind of the gold standard when it comes to the luchador in the United States having that mass appeal, and I absolutely think Rey Fenix can be that next guy, and he doesn't work for WWE. That's the irony there. So Rey Fenix absolutely can be a world champion. The match with Kenny Omega is going to be a show stealer, potentially a match of the year stealer. So keep an eye on that one because that's going to be a lot of fun. Let's move back to NXT because speaking of the AEW World Championship, we've got to talk about the NXT Championship because Kyle O'Reilly versus NXT Champion Finn Balor is now official for the NXT New Year's Evil special. Last night's episode of NXT on the USA Network saw Kyle O'Reilly defeat Pete Dunne to become the new #1 contender to Finn Balor. WWE has confirmed that Kyle O'Reilly versus Balor with the title on the line will take place for the first episode of NXT of 2021. Of course, this will be a rematch from the NXT TakeOver 31 event on October 4, which saw Balor retain in the main event match that almost went about 30 minutes. The New Year's Evil edition of NXT on the USA Network will air live on January 6th. So this is interesting because I believe is this going to be the first match for Finn Balor back inside of an NXT ring, of course defending his NXT Championship, and it's going to be the same match that he got injured in. The match at NXT TakeOver 31 was fantastic. It was absolutely brilliant. It was a huge step up for Kyle O'Reilly. I think everyone wanted to see him succeed, and he absolutely did. Do I think Kyle O'Reilly's going to become the NXT champion? I don't. And I don't think many people would expect that to be the case. But nevertheless, it's going to be an awesome match. It's going to be an absolutely fantastic match. And of course, it's going to be competing with Night 2 of AEW's New Year's Bash as well. So it's going to be interesting when it comes to the ratings on that. You've got a big match for NXT, and they're hoping that's going to bring people in. If I'm Finn Balor, though, and if I'm NXT, and I'm not meaning this to throw shade at Kyle O'Reilly, and I'm not meaning this to say, Kyle O'Reilly's too stiff in the ring, blah, blah, blah. But the last match Finn Balor was in was against Kyle O'Reilly. It was a stiff match. That was the design of the match. It was meant to be stiff, hard-hitting. That was the goal of that main event. It was so hard-hitting that Kyle O'Reilly got busted up, and most importantly, Finn Balor suffered a broken jaw. If they do the same kind of match, the same hard-hitting, stiff match, because they're both strikers, that's the whole deal with Kyle O'Reilly. He's got the jiu-jitsu, MMA background, but he's a striker with those kicks and those stiff forearms. It's the same with Finn Balor. How risky, realistically, is that to have Finn Balor immediately back into a match that can be so hard-hitting and so potentially dangerous to an already just recovered broken jaw? That, to me, it seems a little bit risky. I mean, I'm sure it'll be fine, but it was something that popped into my head of, is that necessarily the best idea? I don't know. I'm looking forward to the match, like I'm looking forward to the Kenny Omega versus Rey Fenix match. I'm absolutely looking forward to that match, but I was just a little bit like, that could be a little bit stiff once again, especially when you've just recovered from a broken jaw. Nevertheless, I'm sure it'll be a fantastic match. Now, speaking of New Year's Evil, we've got a host for New Year's Evil because it was revealed that Dexter Lumis, NXT Superstar Dexter Lumis, will be hosting NXT's New Year's Evil event. A host has been announced for the upcoming NXT New Year's Evil special. It was announced during last night's episode of NXT on the USA Network that Dexter Lumis will host the first episode of 2021. The announcement was made after Lumis was shown various times throughout the show, drawing the New Year's Evil logo from a platform inside the Capitol Wrestling Center. Of course, WWE is using Dexter Lumis as the New Year's Evil host after Shotzi Blackheart acted as the host for Halloween Havoc back in October. Now, a match has also been announced for New Year's Evil. It will be Karrion Kross facing Damian Priest in singles action. Last week's episode of NXT saw Karrion Kross return from an injury, attacking Damian Priest and temporarily putting him on the shelf. Kross made his in-ring return on last night's episode of NXT, easily defeating Desmond Troy in singles action. After the match, Kross spoke into the camera and warned Damian Priest that your blank is mine at New Year's Evil. As I mentioned, New Year's Evil, that edition of NXT will take place on the USA Network live on January 6th from the Capitol Wrestling Center at the WWE Performance Center. So when it comes to the hosts, hosting duties for Dexter Lumis, fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because you have to look at Shotzi Blackheart and what fantastic job she did when she hosted Halloween Havoc. There were huge plaudits for Shotzi Blackheart and how well she hosted that show. She really added to it, and Triple H was huge when heaping praise on Shotzi Blackheart coming out of that, saying it was a star-making show for her. And obviously then she was the captain for her team at NXT TakeOver War Games. Her team lost, but it certainly felt like that hosting gig helped elevate her. Will that do the same for Dexter Lumis? I don't know. They are, I mean, so far polar opposite characters. Dexter Lumis, it's about the art and it's about the silence, and his eyes do all the talking, as it were. So do I think Dexter Lumis is going to be standing there with a microphone saying, and the next match is this, or doing like Shotzi Blackheart was doing, having 5 wardrobe changes like Cher throughout the show? I doubt it very much. What I think they can do, though, is something very unique with Dexter Lumis, and they did it last night when it comes to his art ability. I think that could be a lot of fun. If Dexter Lumis, every time you go to him for his segments during the show, is doing these artworks, as it were, to announce the next match or try and portray what's actually going on inside of his head, that could be really compelling. I think that's the direction they should go in, and I think they will. If they have Dexter Lumis start to talk, that's such a departure from what the character is, and I just don't know if that necessarily would be the right direction for Dexter Lumis to go in. I think just double down on what's working. His look, his facials, and his artwork. I think that's the way to do it. So I would, like I said, every segment that Dexter Lumis is involved in when it comes to this New Year's Evil special, just have him doing some crazy artwork and some really baffling and off-the-wall stuff that announces the next match, but also shows what's going on inside the tortured soul of Dexter Lumis. I think that could be a lot of fun. When it comes to Karrion Kross and Damian Priest, very much looking forward to that match. Is it wise that Karrion Kross doesn't go for the NXT Championship straight away? I think there's a little bit of a lack of logic there, if I'm going to be honest, because the guy won the NXT Championship. He had to relinquish it 3 days later because of his injury he suffered at NXT TakeOver 30 against Keith Lee. The logic in me, and I think a lot of people would say, why doesn't he just go straight for the NXT Championship? I know they've kind of tried to put a bit of logic in Damian Priest saying some stuff to Scarlett first and all that kind of stuff. I think they're trying to sort of divert our attention to saying, well, why wouldn't he go for the NXT Championship? I think Karrion Kross will win. I think Karrion Kross will win against Damian Priest, and then he should challenge for the NXT Championship. I guess maybe they're just saving that for the next TakeOver, whenever that is. Probably Royal Rumble weekend. So I would think that's maybe the case. If Damian Priest is losing against Karrion Kross, that could also probably say that might be one of the final matches for Damian Priest on the NXT roster. Maybe he's going to be one of the newer people to be called up to the main roster of Raw and SmackDown. Of course, Raw needs some drastic changes. Maybe that drastic change is going to be like before. Remember, those drastic changes included the calls up of Ricochet, EC3, Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa for a couple of weeks, Aleister Black, all that kind of stuff. Maybe Damian Priest might be another example of that. We'll have to wait and see. But New Year's Evil is shaping up to be a very interesting event indeed. Going back to AEW and kind of sticking on the WWE line, let's talk about Mike Chioda, because Mike Chioda has given an update as to his status with AEW. Now, of course, Mike Chioda appeared for AEW over the summer. He refereed a TNT Championship match, but we haven't seen much of Mike Chioda since then when it comes to AEW. Now, he did an interview with Wrestling Inc. recently, and he revealed that he's not currently on a full-time deal with AEW, but he is on a part-time deal. He said that he prefers that right now, and he spoke highly of the atmosphere in AEW. This is what Mike Chioda had to say. He said, quote, "Right now, it's not a done deal, a full-time deal. Right now, it's a part-time deal, which is great for me right now. I love the vibe there. AEW has a fantastic vibe with Cody Rhodes, and you've got Chris Jericho and a lot of guys, Jake Hager over there and stuff. You've got some good old-school talent, FTR, and you've got some good young talent that is amazing there. It was kind of weird. I felt green sitting around looking at all these talent that's upcoming because I've been watching the show on TNT, and of course, before I started, I think they've got a really good thing going on there with Tony Khan and Cody Rhodes and them guys." Obviously, for me, I mean, it's got to be a given. Give Mike Chioda what he wants. He is one of arguably the most credible referee around right now that is available for AEW. Who is more credible than Mike Chioda right now? Honestly, nobody. I was stunned. Back in April because of course, Mike Chioda was one of the several WWE superstars, talents, employees, producers, etc. that was either released or furloughed back in April due to budget cuts associated with the ongoing pandemic. I was floored that Mike Chioda was one of those people because this is a guy that's been refereeing for such a long time, but it's not like he's over the hill by any means. He can still referee a match. He still can do his job. This is a guy that main evented WrestleMania 14 with Stone Cold Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels, with Mike Tyson involved there. This guy has so much history and so much credibility, and I know WWE doesn't want referees to be characters. But that is such a BS line when they say, oh, we don't want referees to be characters, because I don't know about you. If I saw back in the day that Earl Hebner was refereeing a match, it felt like a big match. If I saw that Mike Chioda was refereeing a match, it felt like a big match. Now, if I see that Charles Robinson is refereeing a match, it feels like a big match. Big time referees add to the atmosphere and the story of the match. They just do. It's the same with the UFC. Right, when you see, was it Herb Dean, when you see that he's refereeing a match, or Big John McCarthy, whatever his name is, as soon as you see them, you go, oh, well, this is a big fight. This is big, something big is happening here. And it's the same with Mike Chioda. It felt like a bigger match straight away when he was involved with AEW back in the summer. So if I'm AEW, and I know Mike Chioda says the part-time thing works for him right now, if I'm AEW, I'm saying, look, what do you want? What do you want? Because it adds to... If you are a casual fan and you're not that in tune with pro wrestling, but you see, whoa, Mike Chioda's refereeing that match. I remember him from WWE, and he was a big-time referee. Maybe he's jumped ship because AEW's the bigger company. Of course it isn't. Of course it isn't. I know people get angry at that. But it's just, for me, it seems just absolutely, I mean, it's the right thing to do. I mean, it's just the natural thing to do for him to go to AEW full-time. So I hope he does do that in the future. Going back to NXT, we also have some announcements for next week's episode of NXT on the USA Network. It will be, quote, a very Gargano Christmas special. Now, there's no word yet on what The Way, which is the faction of Candice LeRae, NXT North American Champion Johnny Gargano, Indy Hartwell, and Austin Theory have in store next week for the Christmas special of NXT. But they will be, like Dexter Lumis of New Year's Eve, they will be hosting the show next week, a very Gargano Christmas. Now, The Way was in action last night on NXT on the USA Network as Gargano and Theory defeated Leon Ruff and Kushida in the opening match. Hartwell, who is no longer wearing her neck brace as well, later lost to Shotzi Blackheart via DQ interference. Candice LeRae, of course, is still out of action with an arm injury that she sustained at the recent NXT TakeOver War Games 2020 event. It was also announced that next week we will see the return of Colossal Bronson Reed for next Wednesday's show. They were focusing on the colossal billing for Bronson Reed. Bronson Reed's last NXT TV action came on October 21. I'm a big fan of Bronson Reed. I know some people, and there was some discussion with officials in NXT and WWE whether he really was at that level, if he was good enough at that level. I think he looks great. I'm a huge fan of his entrance. The Tron and the way that he makes his entrance, I think that's fantastic. So interested to see him return next week. As far as the whole return of the Gargano Christmas, a very Gargano Christmas special, I don't really care, if I'm going to be honest. The whole Gargano faction just doesn't do it for me. When it comes to Johnny Gargano, this was a guy that 2 years ago, 2018, the feud with Tommaso Ciampa, NXT Championship run as well, he was so over. He was so over in NXT. He really was the heart and soul of NXT, the ultimate babyface. And I know you need to evolve as a talent. I know you need to... Some people do, some people don't when it's the likes of Rey Mysterio, but they're an outlier. You do need to flip back and forth with babyface and a heel, and your character does need to change and evolve over time. But the difference between that Johnny Gargano in 2018 and how over he was and just the potential that you thought was there and what he could do in the future when it comes to NXT and the main roster, for me it's just not there now. Ever since he turned heel at the start of the year with the whole Tommaso Ciampa thing again, they revisited that storyline. I don't know. There is something fundamentally missing and just feels like it's been lost with Johnny Gargano. At this point, I don't know if I have any interest seeing him on Raw and SmackDown. He obviously looks to be like an NXT for lifer. That's fine. But it just doesn't feel like he was the same Johnny Gargano that he was a couple of years ago. I don't know if that's just they've missed their moment when it comes to Johnny Gargano in NXT and the main roster. I don't know. But there just feels like there is something missing. So when they're saying, oh, it's a very Gargano Christmas next week and they've got Gargano, Austin Theory, Indy Hartwell, Candice LeRae, I just don't care. It just doesn't hook me. I know maybe because they're doubling down on it, right, with Gargano and this faction, and they did it with the Gargano at Home segments. None of it has hooked me. And I don't know, it just feels like there is something fundamentally missing that was there previously when it comes to Johnny Gargano. I don't know, you can let me know in the comment section below when it comes to that. We also have an update about a physical WWE Hall of Fame building. Now, how often have we heard the rumblings or the stories, WWE wants to do a physical Hall of Fame building, they want to do this, they want to do that? Well, we do have a bit of an update by none other than two-time WWE Hall of Famer, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. He's given an update about WWE's physical Hall of Fame building. Now, as I mentioned, for, well over a decade at this point, there have been rumblings and rumours and reports and buildings being purchased, blah, 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 of WWE establishing a physical Hall of Fame preferably in Florida. Some people have said Orlando, Florida. According to two-time WWE Hall of Famer Ric Flair, WWE had begun actually the process of building a gallery to showcase the pro wrestling memorabilia before the outbreak of the pandemic earlier this year. This is what Ric Flair said to ESPN's The Jump. He said, quote, WWE is actually in the process of building a Hall of Fame, a physical structure in Orlando. But he said that it's been delayed due to the current pandemic. Now, earlier this year, during a WWE shareholders call, WWE Chairman and CEO Vince McMahon spoke about the possibility of the promotion building a physical Hall of Fame. This is very interesting as well. He said, quote, bricks and mortar is something that, generally speaking, we, other than office building and office space, of course, that we're not necessarily fond of. But nonetheless, again, the interest in that continues to build, and it's still a possibility somewhere down the line. So Vince McMahon seems to be one of the people that isn't super keen on it. I think eventually they'll do it. Would it be profitable and will it make money? I think that's probably the concern, right? That's probably the concern there when it comes to Vince McMahon. Could we genuinely make money from this? If it's a tourist attraction at this point in the current climate, could they make money from it? I don't know. Tourism and all that kind of stuff is down, exponentially. So whether or not they'll do that, I don't know. For me, the whole pandemic right now has probably delayed that process just in terms of building and putting it all together, one thing, but then can it be profitable? That's another thing. WWE hasn't had the best track record when it comes to, as Vince McMahon would put it, bricks and mortar. Do we need to mention WWE New York, or what was it called, The World, or all that kind of stuff? That was such a massive loss for WWE that they got their fingers so badly burned on that scenario that I think they're very hesitant when it comes to physical buildings. Look, if this was a normal time, I would have said, yeah, go for it, because I think in Orlando, you've got Universal Studios there and all that kind of stuff. People, Florida in general, but Orlando is such a tourism point of interest. So I think people would be interested if it was near tourism footfall. But right now, in the current climate, is it a profitable idea? I don't know. It'd be unbelievably cool, and it would actually mean, these Hall of Fame inductions, they would really truly mean something. And I do think they have. The Hall of Fame is such a divisive topic, to be honest, because I do think it means something. But also when you have glaring omissions, like the British Bulldog, like Demolition, we could go on and on from the Hall of Fame, then it does kind of feel less legitimate, if I'm going to be brutally honest. I know in recent years, some of the names like your Lou Theszes and Bruiser Brody have been added in what they call it legacy inductions, which I think is BS. But nevertheless, I think we'll probably see it eventually at some point, just not anytime soon. Once WWE figures out that they can make money from it again and it can be profitable, WWE is driven by the almighty dollar. So once they realize they can make some money of it, they'll probably do it. Right now, I think Ric Flair's right when it comes to it's probably been delayed, but also when it comes to Ric Flair, it's very difficult to believe what he says in interviews. Ric Flair does have a history of just saying wacky stuff to be interesting in the room. He has done that time and time again with interviews, but I don't think, to be honest, he's lying on this one. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. And finally, Eric Bischoff has spoken about his last WWE run and said some very interesting stuff about the structure in place when it comes to WWE creative that he discovered during his run as executive director of SmackDown in 2019. Now, of course, Eric Bischoff had a brief stint as executive director of WWE SmackDown last year. He took charge of the Blue Brand in June until he was fired in October of that year and replaced by Bruce Pritchard. In a recent interview with Digital Spy, Bischoff opened up about his latest experience with WWE and why he had different expectations while accepting the job. Bischoff said although he wasn't missold on what the job entailed, he expected more autonomy and open-mindedness from the higher-ups in the role. He said, quote, there was not nearly the autonomy that I was hoping there would be. There wasn't an open mind to new ways of doing things which either I allowed myself to believe there would be or I was led to believe there would be. I'm not sure which is true even to this day. He then continued saying, quote, I would say it was probably me allowing myself to believe something was true more than being misled. I'll take responsibility for that, but I think there was a little bit of that. When Bischoff and, of course, Paul Heyman were hired as the new bosses of Raw and SmackDown respectively, a number of reports suggested that WWE was going to adopt a new approach to the creative process. However, quickly, Bischoff realized that wasn't going to be the case. He said, quote, there really wasn't a new approach. It was the same approach with different people, and I just didn't fit well. That said, Bischoff said he has no hard feelings toward WWE. He said, quote, "I enjoyed my time in WWE. There's nothing too personal about it. I'm not really familiar with dating apps, but I can only imagine that some people that use them go out and look at a profile and go, wow, they're going to be perfect for me. Let's go out." They go out to dinner and within 20 minutes, they can't wait to get home because the chemistry just isn't there. The expectation and chemistry kind of disconnect somewhere. So I think that was the case. It was more of a chemistry issue than it was anything else. Personally, Bischoff's analogy of dating apps, I mean, you might be a little bit wrong there, but I understand his reference. I understand what he's trying to say there. I don't know necessarily about his references to dating apps. Nevertheless, I thought it was fascinating that came out in the week that Raw did its lowest ever rating, a record low for Monday Night Raw this past week, because that is exactly the issue with Monday Night Raw right now. Obviously, like I said before, we did a whole video on it yesterday. There are fundamentally a lot of issues when it comes to Monday Night Raw. 3 hours is a massive part of that. Although he is right, and it's interesting to hear him say there wasn't an open mind to new ways of doing things. And that is the problem. That is the problem when it comes to Monday Night Raw. There has been no evolution of the WWE creative process or how they shoot television or anything like that in the last 20 years. And when Bischoff tried to say to people, you know, maybe we should do something a little bit different. Maybe we should shoot it a different way. Maybe we should use a different camera angle, use a different setup, the same thing they've been doing for the longest time. Entrance ramp, straight to the ring, big set, blah, blah, blah. You could do something different. Go through the crowd, do an entrance ramp through the crowd, just do something different, a different camera angle, whatever. WWE doesn't want to do it. They are stuck in their ways, and if you say, maybe we should do something different, well, it's always worked for us before, so we're going to do the same. There is no evolution to WWE in terms of the creative process or how they shoot TV. As Bischoff says, there wasn't an open mind to new ways of doing things. It's just different people doing the same stuff. That's essentially the problem there. And I think that speaks very loudly to the issues right now when it comes to WWE. So very interesting comments by Eric Bischoff there. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the news stories that we've presented to you today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, chat about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, all that fun stuff here on the channel. So get involved with the community below. All opinions are welcome, so be sure to leave a comment below. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button as well. It really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to WrestleNews 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.